Mehmed's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Attack at night when defensive fire loses effectiveness, pour through multiple breaches simultaneously, overwhelm exhausted defenders before they can organize coherent resistance. The signal came. Ottoman infantry surged forward in disciplined silence. No battle cries, just the soft thunder of boots on rubble. They reached the breaches and began their ascent. But here, Mehmed made his fatal error in assumption. Hunyadi had anticipated everything. The old general knew night attacks from decades of frontier warfare. Every breach was a carefully prepared trap. As janissaries climbed rubble slopes in darkness, hidden defenders triggered avalanches of stones. Oil-soaked timber, invisible in the night, burst into flames beneath the attackers' feet. Hungarian crossbowmen, positioned on surviving wall sections, fired into packed masses illuminated by sudden fire. The night exploded into chaos that defied description. Janissaries pressed forward because retreat was not in their nature or training. Hungarian knights met them in the gaps, and the greatest infantry of the age clashed with Europe's finest heavy cavalry in spaces so confined that skill mattered less than sheer murderous determination. Steel rang on steel in darkness. Men fought blind in smoke and shadow, stabbing at movement, dying on rubble that shifted treacherously with each step. The sensory overload was absolute. Screams in a dozen languages, gunpowder, smoke-burning lungs, the metallic taste of blood thick in the air. Yet still the Janissaries came, climbing over their own fallen, slowly pushing defenders back through raw numbers and inhuman discipline. By midnight, Ottoman numerical superiority began to tell. A breach near the river gate finally collapsed under sustained pressure. Janissaries poured through like water through a shattered dam. They were inside the lower town, and by every rule of siege warfare, nothing could stop them now. Street by street, house by house, they advanced with methodical precision, clearing each building, securing each intersection. Hungarian defenders fell back in disorder, attempting to form new defensive lines and failing against the relentless tide. The lower town was falling, exactly as Mehmed had planned. Hunyadi, watching from the upper castle, made a decision that would echo through military history and be studied by commanders for centuries to come. If he could not hold the lower town, he would make it worthless to the enemy. The order spread through the defenders like wildfire. Burn everything. Hungarian soldiers threw torches into buildings and poured oil into streets. What the Ottomans had fought so desperately to capture became a trap sprung shut around them. The lower town transformed into an inferno. Janissaries who had struggled so hard to break in now found themselves trapped between advancing flames and defenders who knew every alley and escape route. Ottoman reinforcements could not push through. Their own success had created a bottleneck of fire and death. The disciplined advance dissolved into a desperate fight for survival. This was the pattern interrupt that changed everything. You do not burn your own city, but Hunyadi had learned something crucial from previous battles. Ottoman tactics required space to maneuver, clear lines for reinforcement and communication, transform the battlefield into hell itself. And suddenly, farmers with pitchforks could face elite infantry on equal terms. The Janissaries found themselves fighting not just Hungarians, but the city itself, walls of flame herding them into killing grounds, smoke so thick their firearms became useless clubs. Dawn on the 22nd of July revealed the lower town as a smoldering ruin, defenders and Janissaries alike exhausted from night fighting. But Mehmed had prepared for every contingency. Across the Ottoman lines, massive shapes began moving forward. Siege towers, each standing 50 feet tall and packed with 500 fresh troops, protected by thick timber and wet hides against fire arrows. The earth shook under their weight as teams of oxen and hundreds of men hauled them toward Belgrade's battered walls. From their tops, Ottoman archers could rain arrows down into the city with impunity. When they reached the walls, bridges would drop and fresh waves would pour directly onto the ramparts. It was Constantinople repeating itself. Overwhelming force applied with mechanical precision against a defender who had exhausted every trick and stratagem. But Hunyadi had saved his few precious cannons for exactly this moment. As the siege towers lumbered into range, Hungarian gunners opened fire with everything they possessed. The towers, designed to resist arrows and small arms, met concentrated cannon fire at close range. The first tower took a direct hit at its base. The massive structure swayed, tilted, and collapsed in horrifying slow motion. 500 men screamed as tons of timber became their tomb, crushing friend and foe alike beneath unstoppable weight. The second tower caught fire despite its wet hide protection. Hungarian gunners had loaded heated shot, red-hot iron balls that buried themselves deep into the structure before igniting the dry wood beneath the dampened outer layer. Men leaped from 50 feet rather than burn alive, creating additional chaos as they crashed into advancing infantry formations. Then Mehmed himself appeared at the largest breach, leading his personal guard forward in a final desperate push, the Sultan himself in the breach. His presence electrified the entire Ottoman army. If their young lord would risk death among common soldiers, how could any warrior do less? The attack surged forward with renewed fury, born of shame that their sultan fought while they held back. This is where physics and numbers should have decided the outcome. Mehmed's appearance rallied 20,000 fresh troops to the assault. The Hungarian line bent under impossible pressure, cracked in multiple places, began to crumble toward inevitable collapse. Hunyadi's knights were exhausted beyond human endurance, outnumbered beyond any hope of survival. In minutes, perhaps less, Belgrade would fall, and Europe with it. Then the impossible occurred. Capistrano's Crusaders, 40,000 peasants who had been held in reserve with strict orders to wait for the signal, suddenly surged forward against all commands, against military logic, against sanity itself. The 70-year-old priest led them, a wooden crucifix held high above his head, his thin voice somehow carrying over the battle's roar. "The Lord fights with us." Hunyadi's first reaction was pure horror. Untrained peasants charging elite janissaries was suicide, throwing away the only reserve remaining. But as he watched farmers with pitchforks crash into janissary lines, he witnessed something that defied his 20 years of military experience. The Ottomans hesitated. These were not soldiers fighting by understood rules of warfare. These were madmen who sang hymns while dying, who charged cannons armed with agricultural tools, who showed no fear because heaven awaited the faithful. In that moment of Ottoman confusion, Hunyadi made the decision that would kill him within weeks, but save Europe for generations. Instead of attempting to stop the peasant charge, he supported it with everything remaining. "Heavy cavalry, advance!" The Hungarian knights, seeing their desperate chance, formed up and charged behind the peasant wave. From the Ottoman perspective, it was insanity made manifest. First came a human tsunami of screaming crusaders, completely unpredictable, attacking with suicidal fervor that made no tactical sense. Then, as janissary lines tried to adjust to this chaos, Europe's finest heavy cavalry smashed into them like an iron fist wrapped in steel plate. Discipline met chaos, and chaos was winning through sheer audacity. The Ottoman lines did not merely break, they shattered like thin ice struck by a hammer. Janissaries who had never retreated in their history found themselves stumbling backward in disbelief. The peasant charge had accomplished what no professional army could achieve. It had destroyed the rhythm of Ottoman warfare, disrupted the careful choreography that had conquered from Baghdad to the Balkans. Behind those peasants came death in armor, Hungarian knights cutting through disorganized enemy formations like a blade through silk. The retreat became a rout within minutes. Crusaders broke through into the Ottoman camp itself, and what they discovered there changed the battle's entire complexion. The Sultan's great cannons sat abandoned, their crews fled or dead. 17 seconds that would flip the entire siege. Hungarian knights reached the artillery pieces, and Hunyadi himself was there, his dying body finding one last surge of strength as he shouted orders to soldiers who had never fired a cannon in their lives. They turned the massive weapons around. The ultimate reversal of fortune. Ottoman guns now pointed at the Ottoman camp. When they fired, the psychological impact was absolutely devastating. Ottoman soldiers who had been attempting to reform their shattered lines saw their own artillery destroying their own positions, killing their own comrades. The cry went up like wildfire through the ranks. The cannons are taken. In Ottoman military doctrine, this was not merely a setback, but the signal of total irreversible defeat. Then came the moment that ended Ottoman invincibility forever. Mehmed, still fighting personally in the breach like a common soldier despite his royal status, took an arrow to the thigh. The projectile struck with enough force to knock the young sultan unconscious from pain and sudden blood loss. His bodyguards dragged him away from the fighting, but the damage to Ottoman morale was catastrophic and irreparable. The cry spread faster than truth or reason could follow. The Sultan is dead. Mass panic consumed an army that had never known defeat. 60,000 soldiers fled from farmers and broken knights. Elite janissaries ran alongside camp followers and supply train workers. The greatest military machine on earth dissolved into a terrified mob seeking only escape from this place where the impossible had occurred and the natural order had been overturned. At the river crossings, thousands drowned as panic transformed orderly retreat into catastrophe. Men in armor sank like stones. Others were trampled by those behind them. The slaughter that followed defied description. Crusaders, blood-mad with victory and religious ecstasy, pursued fleeing Ottomans to the river's edge. Professional Hungarian soldiers who might have shown mercy were swept along by peasant fury. The Danube ran red, not as poetic exaggeration, but as literal truth. Bodies clogged the ford so thoroughly that later waves of fugitives crossed on the corpses of their comrades. By full daylight on July 23rd, the Ottoman camp stood empty except for the dead and dying. The wealth abandoned there defied calculation. Silk pavilions, golden dinner services, the Sultan's personal library, chests of coins meant to pay the army for months. The great basilica cannon sat silent amid scattered ammunition, a monument to the futility of overwhelming force against desperate courage. The statistics remain almost impossible to believe. 24,000 Ottoman dead against 3,000 defenders lost. The Janissary Corps effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. More Ottoman soldiers died fleeing from Belgrade than had fallen taking Constantinople 3 years earlier. When Mehmed regained consciousness in a boat fleeing downriver, his first words became Ottoman legend. "I have lost my honor at Belgrade." The young conqueror who had broken Byzantium wept, not from his wound, but from shame. In one afternoon, he had gone from destiny's chosen instrument to history's greatest fool, beaten by farmers and an elderly priest. But death was not finished with Belgrade. Disease spread through the packed city as summer heat rotted thousands of corpses. Plague was inevitable. Hunyadi felt the sickness first. On August 11th, just 3 weeks after his greatest victory, John Hunyadi died. His last meeting with Capistrano saw two enemies reconcile. If this story of courage against overwhelming odds moved you, subscribe to Flow of History for more tales of the pivotal moments that shaped our world. Ring the notification bell and join us as we uncover the human stories behind history's greatest turning points.